This is the third part of this video series. It originally started out as just one video. That was actually more of a rant. 1 year later, I did the second part and talked about my whole autism evaluation experience and the trauma that happened. And in this part, I will be going into the depths of how much my way of eating has really helped me to function better. And I came across a lot of very useful information that confirms what I am experiencing myself. From 3 different sources. Let's get into it, shall we? So the first source of information is a great presentation by Mary Ruddick. She's a nutritionist, a researcher, and a philanthropist. Mary has recently spent time among a number of African tribes, observing their diets, their lifestyles, their traditional wisdoms, and their comparative health. She compares and contrasts aspects of health in different tribes with different behaviors and traditions, both between tribes and as a stark contrast to modern Western peoples. This discussion is a discursive and enlightening trip into Africa, the cradle of humanity.
I think it is so hard to deny if we see something with our own eyes. I got into this field by accident. I was working at a field station when I was very young and got very sick, and it was in reversing that illness through diets, through really intensive, counterintuitive and counter pyramid diets that I put all those conditions into remission. And so after that, I ended up going back to school for nutrition and setting up practice. And since that time, I've really specialized in hard to treat conditions. I love the easy ones too, but usually I work with the hard to treat, the peculiar, the difficult to respond conditions. And then during my free time, so the evenings, the morning, and the weekends, I do my research. I work with a lot of different diets, but all of the diets that I work with all have an ancestral basis. And when I was sick myself, for context for your audience, I was sick for 12 years with quote unquote irreversible things. I think we all know that that most things that are considered irreversible are not irreversible. They're simply irreversible with the tools that were given. However, I did the things that we're all told to do. I did the plant-based diet, I was vegetarian, I did vegan, I did raw, as many of us do. And I think it's very common for most of us to go there first because there's so much pervasive information about that. Even if you just go to the grocery store and you don't have access to a TV, all the food that's marketing itself as healthy will say healthy, and then it's something with vegetables or healthy grain products, right? And you see that on menu items as well. You never see healthy steak put together on a menu or on a label. And so I found that most people waste a lot of time in the healing game. And having been sick myself, I don't know about you, my goal is to keep people from going through that. I want people to have this knowledge immediately when they get sick so that they don't have to jump through the hoops and do a ton of experiments to try to get better. Not that that can't be a good experience. It was wonderful for me, but I would have rather learned that in the first year than at year 12. I'll speak to my patients first because I've been working with the carnivore diet for over 10 years. And I had learned about it from Dr. Natasha McBride. She had talked about how in Russian medical schools it's taught for schizophrenia and severe mental disorders, and it's been taught for hundreds of years. And so I jumped on that right away. I was the director for a mental health clinic, and so I was seeing lots of schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, all those kinds of things. So I've been working with carnivore a lot from the get-go, and I found it to be extremely successful. Extremely. I think if people knew what they had in their tool chest, it would be the first line of defense. But the gradients among what one must do seem very small to someone who doesn't work in the nutrition world, but they're actually huge to the body. They're huge to the microbiome and the nervous system and the immune system. And so, yeah, very small, seemingly small changes can make a massive impact. And that's not just with the carnivore diet. It's with a GAPS diet as well. Like if you go from like a Weston A. Price to a GAPS, or a junk food keto to a whole food keto, or a whole food keto to like to an ancestral. There's so many different gradients within each diet that you can do. And with the carnivore, I teach a multitude. I haven't sat down and counted them, but it has to do with what the person is dealing with and also the progress that they're getting. So when I get someone with, say, schizophrenia, we go just red meat, salt, and water. And then if it's someone with, say, Lyme disease or histamine disorders, sometimes we can do more, but it fully depends on the person. Classically, the carnivore diet that was taught by the Russians included some plants, but not fibrous plants. So you could have like tea, only herbal tea though, and not teas with long chain sugars. So they were very specific about what kind of teas. You could basically have like ginger tea and mint tea. But then when I go and study with carnivore tribes, it's very different. So there's lots of different gradients that you can do, and you've got to do the level in which you see the healing. If you're not seeing progress, then you've got to go deeper, and you've got to look a bit deeper. It was a bit of a passion project. So I've been traveling for the last several years, documenting groups all over the world. But this in particular trip was more of a passion trip. So I did document everything. I will use it later, I'm sure. But for me, I spent 4 years mostly bedbound with my illness, and I was really kind of at the end. My organs were going downhill quickly, and around that time, I had been doing quote unquote everything correct, and was getting much worse. And I stumbled upon Weston A. Price's work, and specifically his book. And when I read about the Masai, it turned my world upside down. It was eye-opening because I couldn't, my dad is a physicist, and I grew up kind of with a science-based mentality. So I understood how to look at things, and that if something disproved a theory, that it wasn't a theory anymore. It transitioned it back to a hypothesis. And when I saw what the Masai were eating and that they were in such perfect health, and also put that in light with the fact that they were living in one of the toughest environments, they were dealing with some of the worst infections and they weren't getting them, that told me they were onto something, and that flipped my world upside down. So that got me eating meat again, and organ meats, and I jumped full hog, as many of us do, and found Weston A. Price, and I improved a lot. I didn't go carnivore. I didn't know anyone doing that at the time, so I didn't know about it. Otherwise, I would have done it. But I went Weston A. Price, and I was already ketogenic and low carb. I had found that really helped with my neuropathy and things like that. And then maybe a year into that, I had improved a bit, and then I found the GAPS diet and did a very specific version of that, much more concise than what most people do. It was very strict, and then ended up going into remission. And so the Masai, for me, their story, really, in many ways, I see them as saving my life. And their example to be a shining beacon of what human health can actually be, that we don't have to fall victim to infections, that we really aren't victims at all, but we're just not doing the right thing. And so I've always wanted to go and see for my own eyes. It's one thing to read something out of a book, but you never know if what you read is actually true. So I wanted to see it myself. I wanted to share food with them. I wanted to see what they were like now, if things had changed since Weston A. Price had been there, and if the corn that had come into many of the communities had really denigrated their health, or how they were doing with that. So it was very much a passion project on my own. Now, one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time, and what I've been working on for years, is showing different communities around the globe really in perfect health. One, because people don't believe that perfect health is a thing anymore. Everybody has a condition. And two, to show that you can be healthy on lots of different protocols. But once you get sick, it's a very different story as to how you can recover. To try to help explain to people, well, you know, okay, I'm Japanese. My great-grandparents ate rice. Why can't I eat rice? Kind of thing. So I want to have a good explanation for people, and I think there's a very logical explanation there. It's a very different thing to eat something when you're healthy than it is when you're sick. And these folks just don't get sick. They don't get the malaria and dengue and sleeping sickness that's around there. So anyway, so they do, when they slaughter a goat, they'll eat it all in one night, and then the next day they'll go to milk and blood for the next 3 days. So they'll do nothing but milk and blood. But they have that herb soup most nights, and they always have it after a kill because they use the organ meats to make it. So they'll always have it with the meat, and they have it as kind of like a dessert. They don't, none of these tribes honestly did any kind of dessert. They don't have a sweet tooth at all. So that's what they do, and then they'll do like 3 days of the milk and the blood, and then they'll do another animal. Now, when they do cows, when they slaughter a cow, they'll eat that for 3 days instead. It's a lot more meat, and they'll smoke it so that it lasts. But in general, everything is very, very fresh with the Masai. They don't do the biltong, they don't do the jerkies, they don't do any of that. They're never hungry. They just eat when it's there, and they're not anxious. They don't get hangry, nothing like that. And yeah, I'm not surprised. Well, I should say this in the context of this last trip. With seeing these 9-10 different communities, you could see variant degrees of health by the eye, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we asked them a lot of questions, and I took their blood sugar and their ketones and things like that, but you could see it from the eye, that the more animal products they ate, the better they were, and the more protected they were. And the more of the agricultural foods they ate, the more prone they were to modern disease and modern infection. So, for instance, I sat down, I was able to organize a council of elders that we could talk to. So this is just a ton of old people, basically. And this was in a farming community. So not like the Hadza or the Batwa or the Pygmies or any of these groups. So this is a farming community. And when they were young, they would eat meat 3 times a day and eat dairy on a daily basis. And that was typically goat or sheep dairy and butter. And now they were eating primarily maize instead of sorghum or millet. So they had switched to corn, and they were eating vegetable oil instead of butter, and they only ate meat very infrequently. It had gotten too expensive. And now they looked like our elders, maybe not quite as severe. They weren't in wheelchairs, but they had clear arthritis. They had lost their teeth. You know, they had all these issues. And when we asked them about their parents, they still had their longevity, by the way, but they were ill when they were old. And when we asked them about their parents didn't have any of those issues, and they died in their sleep of old age and had many generations below them when they died. Their children are far more sick, and their grandchildren extremely so. And specifically, when I say that, I mean to infections. What I often see in these communities when they start to adopt modern foods, and when I say modern foods, I actually only mean wheat processed the modern way, corn, and vegetable oil, because these communities aren't eating things like potato chips. They're not eating things like desserts and fast food and restaurant food, right? They're still cooking all their own food, usually on a fire. And so that's all that's come in. But you see the degradation, especially generationally, of the health to the ability to fight off infection. And this was the most obvious with the Batwa. So the Batwa were actually one of the, aside from the Masai, who literally glow with health. They have no health issues at all. Their skin glows, their posture is incredible. They have all of this muscle, they're fleshy, you can tell they're never hungry, beautiful, beautiful teeth, bright eyes. I mean, and emotionally, one thing, because I worked so often in mental health and for so many years, I really look for the cues for mental illness, both in children, because I work with a lot of children, and also in adults, and there's just none. There's none. There's no anxiety. There's no depression. There's no autism. There's no attention issues. In fact, people are always shocked to hear that children don't have temper tantrums at all, because they're calm and they're happy and they're so socially comfortable that I can go into a group I've never met before that is not prone to tourists. They're not on the tourist track, right? There are some of these groups that are and some that aren't. And I can go and just pick up a child within 1 second. I don't have to say hi. I don't have to spend some time with it. First, I can just pick up a child, put it in my arms, and it's going to sleep already. They're very calm children and happy children. So socially, they're very good, but in the Batwa, you could really see the difference in the immune function. It's the pygmy group, and then under that umbrella, there are different clans. So I was visiting the Batwa clan, which used to live in the Bwindi forest of Uganda. They've since been forced out in the early 90s due to the new laws creating the Bwindi forest and protecting the gorillas. I actually think most of the issues that are going on, at least in this region of Africa, are due to the humanitarian and environmental efforts that are destroying people's health. But with the Batwa, we met people that had 6 living generations and people that were well over 100. But with the Batwa, they actually do traditionally register birthdays and celebrate that. And so you do actually know with them, but you can also see the generations. So, we had a woman who's 120 with her sister still alive, one of her daughters still alive at 93, then, 5 more generations after that. And they're just in peak incredible health. These old ladies, those 3 old ladies, and there were many other elders in the community. So I'm not cherry picking. There's a lot of elders in the Batwa community. They all grew up in the forest, hunting and gathering, and mostly hunting, to be honest. They talked about how they ate meat 3 times a day every season of the year, that meat was plentiful, that they would have honey during the short season, and some berries for about 3 months a year, and some root vegetables for about 4 months a year, but they would eat meat consistently throughout the year and every day and with each meal. And when they were forced out of the forest, they now live on the edge, and they're not farmers. They don't know how to do this. They also have no money. They're not from a financial system. And so they're really in a bit of a pickle for food. And so their meat consumption has gone down to twice a year. Holidays. They get it for 2 holidays a year. That's it. And somehow the elders have maintained their health.
This is yet another great Axia ASD UK presentation by Florence Neville. You can listen to it yourself. I will put the link in the description. It's on Lord Dream's great YouTube channel. I will just share a few slides of this presentation. The first slide says autism plus environment equals the outcome by Dr. Luke Bearden. For autistics, the external environment is very challenging. There are the bright lights, the sounds everywhere, the smells and the tastes, the textures, so many other people everywhere. And of course, changes in routine or expected events, and the pressure to modify your own behavior. All of this will cause a lot of stress. So therefore, autistics are already more stressed chronically than average people. But then you have the internal environment. So many autistics also struggle with food allergy, intolerance or sensitivity, inflammation, disrupted gut bacteria and function, structural issues and pain, headaches and migraines, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. This is just one cluster of additional health issues autistics struggle with. And so many autistics also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. chronic long-term illness. So these are the comorbidities. So many autistics struggle with those additional straws on their camel's back. There is the sugar balance and the hormonal imbalance. This can all cause additional stress. When a stressful internal or external environment triggers a cortisol release, then your brain function becomes temporarily impaired. So what happens when you have high cortisol? You have short-term memory. You have problems with speech and sensory processing. You have issues with mood and behavior regulation. And you might experience even more difficulties with planning and organizing, so-called executive functioning. You cannot make good judgments. It will create insomnia, and it will lead to meltdowns and shutdowns. So we have a natural cortisol cycle. Cortisol is highest at 8 a.m., which tells us get up, get out, go hunt. However, I must say, people with fibromyalgia, their cortisol levels are disrupted. Same goes for chronic fatigue. Studies have found low morning salivary cortisol levels. What the vast majority of these people, more than 90%, have is slightly lower morning cortisol level and sometimes also slightly higher evening cortisol levels. This means that a person will typically have slightly lower morning cortisol levels when cortisol should be higher, and sometimes also slightly higher cortisol levels in the evening when cortisol should be lower, as compared with people with an ideal cortisol rhythm. And this is exactly how I feel. In the morning, when I get up, I'm still a little bit brain fog, and it takes about 1 to 2 hours until I really feel awake. And when I try to read text, it looks slightly blurry. But I think this is not my eyes, but just my brain that needs to catch up and really wake up. And then in the evening, I just can go on, and I'm not tired until 1, 2 o'clock sometimes. And I cannot fall asleep when I try to go to bed earlier. It doesn't work. So with those external and internal stressors being already present, if we actually eat sugar, we disrupt our natural 24-hour cortisol cycle. So we are adding stress on top of stress. Therefore, we should really avoid sugar. Consuming sugar causes stress. When sugar levels in the bloodstream are high, then we produce extra insulin to lower them again. The body treats this drop in sugar level as an emergency situation. Sugar is an internal environmental stressor. I must really say, since I have weaned off, because I was an addict, I have weaned off of sugar, I feel so much better. Also the fruits. Everything. Now I have no sugar spikes and no low blood sugar anymore. It's very even, thanks to the way I eat, and therefore mood has stabilized. Very balanced. And it's important to time the nutrients to help to support the natural cortisol cycle by timing your macronutrients. Phase out sugary breakfast cereals and toast in favor of protein and fat-based breakfasts. Limit sugar throughout the day. Include complex carbohydrates in the evening, such as rice, potatoes, and plenty of vegetables. Yeah, for those that still eat those foods. I am not one of them. And feed your hormones. Eat the foods that helped your ancestors' hormonal systems to develop. Eat a lot of meat, fish, and eggs if you can tolerate them. And the old-fashioned lard, or you have duck fat, goose fat, beef tallow. All those fats are so much better than vegetable oil. Even butter, if you can tolerate butter. That one is great too. And lessen the triggers. The autistic brain is significantly more prone to stress than the non-autistic brain. Remember that environmental stressors can be internal or external. Find ways to avoid these stressors. If avoidance is not possible, then allow plenty of recovery time afterwards. My friend Carol Bird has coined the term Primal Autistic. I resonate with it very deeply. Listen carefully what she has to say about primal autistics and how we are supposed to eat to feel at our best.
Because it's so against your primal instincts, the conduct that you have to have on a daily basis, your routine, your lifestyle, it's just like, what? You hate it. It does not feel right. It does not resonate with you in here. But you go with the program, every day. You just get up when that alarm goes off and you just do your thing. Or you got to the point where you couldn't pull it off, you couldn't do it anymore, and now you're just like a recluse. Chose to give up on it all and kind of live like a loner now. That's what life for a primal autistic looks like when they're trying to go with the flow in society. Because we don't fit. We don't fit here. And so where do you fit? Well, you will feel most alive when you are interacting with other primal beings. So this is going to be animals, other primal autistic people. You'll watch autistic people on, let's say, YouTube or whatever, and you will feel a very strong connection to them. And then actually physically being in nature will have a profound effect on you. So when you're walking through the woods, when you're by the ocean, when you're having a campfire, when you're watching water run, when you're hearing the birds chirp, the cricket sounds. Something will happen in your being that you feel the most alive when you have access to these elements. Even if it's not physical access, you'll have a visceral response even watching these elements, like on TV or YouTube, watching and listening to streams running and storms and fire crackling. Your wiring is programmed to hear those sounds and speak to you in all kinds of ways that resonate with you in a really positive way. That's the only way I know how to word it. And it makes you feel alive and at peace and whole. And then everything that's opposite to that makes you feel opposite. Like, just if you look at the way what we live in, even that feels like, oh, this feels claustrophobic and institutional, you know? And having people all around and feeling like there's no privacy, and just the busyness of stores and lights and street lights and snow blowers and lawnmowers and just the chaos of society and civilization. It just makes you want to run and hide. And so for the most part, if you can, that's what you do. So that's one element of being a primal autistic, is that trying to blend into society literally drives you to insanity and severe depression, and gives you a lot of anxiety, and it causes you to look like you have like social phobia, but what it is you're just trying to blend into the wrong environment. If you were to take yourself and plop yourself into a tiny little village and community of only primal autistic people, and you guys were just, you know, living off the land and doing your thing and peaceful, quiet environment, you probably wouldn't feel autistic at all. And you might even become very extroverted. The way that our genetic makeup, the way our DNA structure and all of that, the way we're wired, the type of diet that we need is pretty specific, actually, from what I'm noticing. And that is a primal autistic that tries to get away with being like vegan and not having any meat product in their diet, unfortunately, will battle really severe psychosis. I'm not saying that happens to every single autistic, but I am saying those that I know that are primal autistic people, they need to eat meat.
Yep.
And they need to eat quite a bit of it, and they
Absolutely.
need to eat red meat often.
Yes. Yes.
And we need a lot of salt. And there's a lot of different reasons for all of this that I'm not going to get into in this video, but primal autistic people that try to get away with having like a low-fat diet, a vegan diet, a raw food diet, a low-sodium diet, you are not going to feel happy.
No.
If you're a primal autistic person, you're going to feel best off of having like a steak and eggs for breakfast, an avocado with salmon for lunch, and maybe like me, a Big Mac for supper. And that's, yep, you'll feel the best.
Exactly.
And you'll feel like crap if you just have like a carbohydrate. You won't feel well. You won't feel well emotionally, physically, mentally, energy-wise. You won't feel good.
Let that sink in.
Yes, I do. It's one of the ones, the overlap with the referrals that I mentioned earlier to the Lorna Wing Centre, is that many of the individuals have eating problems, eating disorders. And from very early on, the girls are often very picky about what they eat.
I wouldn't say that I was picky. Not really. I practically ate everything except olives. But later on, I actually became quite fond of the dark ones. Capers. They seriously taste awful. I still cannot eat them. And artichokes. I mean, what kind of weird food is that anyway? You have to pull off that little flesh you find on every leaf. Then you have a big mess of empty leaves, and in the middle you have a hairy part where you have to pull off all those bloody hairs until you can eat the bottom. Seriously, that's not worth it. And the taste? Not really, no thanks. So it was just those three that really made me want to puke when I was a kid. Oh, forgot one. That's the last one that comes to mind. Really didn't like the taste of that one. Yeah. Notice something? All vegetables. But apart from that, not really picky. I also love to try new food, especially when abroad. That's what my parents taught me. So when we were in Spain, I loved the seafood there, and I loved the local food. But I had a very sweet tooth, that I had. I ate everything that was sweet, like cookies and chocolate. There I was really an addict. And I also loved crunchy food, especially when it was sweet or salty, especially those types of cookies, when it had chocolate in it. And those types of salty chips, it has vegetable oil, so it's actually very bad food. It's not even food. Oh well, I had my share of those. But that was me as a kid and teenager. Well, and as a vegetarian, I still love the sweets, and I also love cheese for a very long time, especially the more salty ones. But the Emmentaler, not my taste. That one is rather sweet, and I preferred this one salty. Until I discovered that sugar, cheese, and gluten actually might be responsible for my PMDD. That's PMS with suicidal ideation and severe depression and menstrual cramps, emotional roller coaster. And since I weaned off of all those foods, I no longer have an issue with PMDD, just very slight issues. A migraine, feeling a bit anxious and a bit irritable, and that's it. So it's a big difference as it was before, wanting to die every single month, can you imagine? And now it's just 2 days and it is over.
Sensory issues are very important. So the texture of the food, the smell of the food, the sight of the food can actually influence their early eating patterns.
So the very sight of this skin on too hot milk made me want to puke. Really, I'm not joking. I started retching as soon as I saw this and had to really turn away from it. But then also, after my dad took away that skin and I drank the hot milk, I just couldn't digest it. It would sit there like a stone for hours. So that was the first sign actually that I had a dairy allergy, especially the milk.
Then maybe in adolescence, someone might make a remark like you're fat or you're overweight, which they take to heart. And then that leads on to checking weight, calorie counting.
I honestly was never into that. This was way too much effort. As soon as it comes to numbers and calculating, because I might have a slight dyscalculia, I don't know, but my brain just tunes out. So, calorie counting, it's just plain stupid. Why do people do that? I don't get it.
Diets, going to the gym, going for the run, which becomes a routine and an obsession. So rather than it being
Not for me.
to do with body image, it may be a bit to do with body image, but it's more to do with the routines of autism and the sensory things of autism than it is actually more typical anorexia. So the numbers. There are inpatient units, clinics, where they are now looking at the prevalence of people in the units who may have an autism spectrum disorder. And it really is quite common, and quite common with the number of people we see at the Lorna Wing Centre. So it's important to know the function of the dieting and the control and the perfectionism, because that's very, very strong with the girls, is that they have to be in control. And because otherwise, life is so bewildering, they get more and more anxious without being in control. And diet is a wonderful way of controlling.
For me, eating in a restricted way, having removed all the trigger foods, it's straws off the camel's back. And the way I eat indeed makes my life very simple. If I had to think about what I want to cook every single day, meaning having different types of meals, this is way too complicated. I really love simplicity. That's just how I operate. So for me, this way of eating is just a very good solution. And that way I always eat enough. It's also no snacking, no grazing in between. Just 3 meals and then intermittent fasting. It's a very regulated way of eating, of course. But it's not about control. Not at all. You can say that my identity is kind of based on the way I eat, but not in regards to ideology. Not at all. It is more about autonomy. I have the wish to choose what comes into my body. I need the sense of agency because I know what's good for my body. I know what is not good for my body. N equals 1, okay? So with experimentation, I have now a very good idea what I need to eat in order to function and what I need to avoid so I can remain free of pain. Experts should not automatically assume that every autistic woman has an eating disorder. Seriously not. Listen to the details and the differences. It's not just one size fits all. For me, the way I eat is very clearly having a big impact on how I function on a cognitive level, on a mental level, on a physical level, on an emotional level. Eating meat, to the extent I do now, it has not been always like that. And I have experimented and tried literally everything. And therefore, I obviously have the comparison. I can say, this diet made me feel awful. And the way I eat now, I feel so much better. Taking straws off the camel's back. See for yourself the difference. You can really see it. Extremely dry skin. And this was in 17, okay? I had brain fog, I was depressed, digestive issues, chronic pain. I felt like fucking shit. And now, totally different. That's why I eat the way I eat. Period. It's out of necessity. That's what my body needs to function properly. Okay? So leave me the fuck alone with your stupid judgment. Sorry, I'm getting triggered again from that stupid autism expert. I have not looked at this for almost a year since I was diagnosed. But this is the woman who does those diagnoses, calling herself an expert. For me it was traumatic. Her way of looking at me through her lens. Seriously, she was not listening. She claims, I will listen exactly and try to truly understand you. She didn't. Not at all. See here, she has the autism, then eating disorders is her specialty, so of course she will see all autistics as eating disordered. Very logical. Not. Then she claims she knows about trauma. I didn't see any of that when I told her about all these traumas. She didn't see the PTSD, which is really very much there. This woman should not do autism diagnosis, or she should really update her knowledge on all of that. So now I say to those so-called autism experts, back off. I know my body, and I have to pay the consequences if I don't eat the way I eat. And it's none of your business. Back off. Anyway, just to make that clear.
So carnivores, omnivores, humans. Today's video is meat heals.